Hello, everyone. Welcome to our lecture for English Units 3 and 4. My name is Sunny. I'm really excited to be delivering this lecture to you all today, and I hope that you find it particularly useful for your exam prep for the English Units 3 and 4 exam. Um, let's get started. So on these slides, you can see some of the free resources that ATAR Notes has to offer to further help you with your studies, as well as ATAR Notes Plus. But let's jump straight into the lecture, and I'll begin by introducing myself and giving you guys a little bit of information about me. So as I mentioned, my name is Sunny. I graduated in 2021 with an ATAR of 96.70. I received a study score of 44 in English, and the other subjects that I did included legal, literature, English language, further maths, and psychology. I'm currently in my last year of completing a Bachelor of Paramedicine degree at Monash University. So the first thing that I wanted to begin with for today is to remind you that it isn't too late for effective study. If you feel like you've been struggling with the subject and you've fallen behind, it isn't too late to catch up. It's just important to put in a lot of work and play the VCA game. English is a very formulaic subject. Essays and everything are heavily structured, so you can sort of treat English like maths and follow a very formulaic approach when you write, and you can genuinely excel with that in this subject. Doing a lot of essay plans as well is crucial. So I've written on here plan, plan, plan. So, reminding you of the sections of your exam. In Unit 3, you study text response and creating text, which will both be on your exam, as well as another text response in Unit 4. You do have the option between doing either text you did for text response as your exam text, essentially whatever you felt more confident with and you thought you wrote better essays on. But there is a consideration that, the text response text you did for Unit 4 is the most recent and the most fresh in your mind, and you've got your quotes memorized. You probably just had your SAC very recently for it. So, if you're not really sure, I would say your Unit 4 text would be the better choice for that reason. And then in Unit 4, we also do analyzing argument, and that is going to be section C of our exam. So how today is going to run, you can follow along on the bottom bar as well, but we'll begin some English basics and talking through some important ideas and skills, foundational sort of things. And we'll move into text response, which is section A, then we'll go into creating text, and then we'll go lastly into analyzing argument. So for this session, we have to go very quickly through our revision as it's only a couple of hours. So I urge you to use the live chat Q&A that's attached to the lecture. I will be answering you guys' questions live. So whether that's additional tips you want about exam prep, we will be talking about exam prep at the end of the session. There is a dedicated section for that as well. But if you have some additional questions or you want to clarify essay structure things, writing ideas, and things like that, please definitely ask me and use this opportunity. So let's reposition the three sections of the exam. So section A, reading and responding, where you will be writing an analytical response exclusively about a text, no comparison, no external sources, minimal background information provided about the text. It's all about your analysis. On the exam, you will have a choice of 2 prompts. You'll have to pick one to construct a contention in response to. Generally, we'll be talking about prompt types soon as well, but generally there is one broad prompt and one narrow prompt. So the broad prompt is like a thematic or views and values prompt, and your narrow prompt can be something like structural features that ask you to more write about structural features and literary devices, assuming if you pick that structural features prompt, that would be the expectation. So we need to know our prompt types as well to understand what they're asking us to do. And generally, one of the prompts has a quote included within it as well that you have to analyze somewhere within your body paragraphs within a suitable argument. Section B, crafting text. You'll be writing a creative piece in response to your chosen framework and one stimulus material. There is the option VCI has included to use more than one stimulus material in crafting your response, which just makes the task harder for yourself. So don't do that. Just pick one. And your piece must closely fit the stimulus, must incorporate the elements of audience, purpose, and context, and must have a meaningful message that can be identified in your writing that is closely related to your framework. There is no requirement to use your mentor text on the exam. I've had some students ask me this. You could if you wanted to, but you really don't have to. And, they're there to help you build your writing skills and to serve as a bit of inspiration as well, really. Section C, analyzing argument. You'll get a 2-page article with a couple of images. That's just exactly what it's been over many years now, like a 2-page article and 2 visuals to analyze. And the expectation will be to discuss how written and visual material contributes to an author's argument and attempts to persuade readers. So you're literally analyzing their argument. Another very structured formulaic essay. How we stand out is by finding the more complex persuasive language techniques to analyze within the material. Good. So as an important note as well, make sure you do a lot of plans as part of your exam prep, and on the exam as well, making sure you plan, because the amount of planning and effort that you put into planning does determine the quality of your overall essay. It makes a world of difference. It really does. And it makes sure that you have a strong line of argument and well-developed topic sentences, which is a significant amount of your marks. It's very important. Your plans are not marked on the exam, so you should be creating these before you start your essay. I know this is a section A plan, but same kind of thing you should be doing for section C for argument analysis. You should have a plan. And this is quite too comprehensive for the exam, because realistically you should be spending 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, or yeah, up to 5 minutes on a plan, because you have such limited writing time. So if you spend 5 minutes on a plan, you have now 55 minutes writing time for your essay. So I would dot point my contention, my body paragraph 1, 2, and 3 arguments, and send in sentence fragments include the short quotes and literary devices that I'm planning to use for the paragraph. So feel free to pause here, but this is a beautiful plan here included on this slide that shows some really nice topic sentences and contention as well. Good. Let's move into our first section, which is covering the basics of English. So the first thing we need to review is the process of analysis, which is what you use for your analyzing argument essays. Should be very formulaic. It's a 3-step process. The what, how, and why. So for every persuasive language technique, which is I'll refer to as PLT for now, it's a bit shorter. You need to first analyze the what, which is identifying what technique it is. So naming it is very important, using the appropriate meta language. Is it rhetorical question, an appeal to family values? So state what it is, quote it, and then explain it. Explain what the language actually means. If you're saying it's imagery, what kind of imagery does it create? If it's negative connotations, well, negative connotations associated with what? We can't just put negative connotations, quote, and that's it. So define, explain your technique first. And then you have the option of analyzing either the how or the why, or a combination of both for each piece of evidence that you use in each technique. So how is the intended effect upon the audience? Essentially here, you're answering the question, what does this make the audience think or feel or do? So your answer should be stating one of those things. A lot of students' intended effect analysis isn't actually intended effect. It's all about think, feel, do. So think of it that way. So how does it aim to position the audience? Use vocabulary like this evokes feelings of, this aims to elicit for instance. So set up a lot of different constructions so that you're not repeating intended effect, intended effect. The intended effect of this is that's what we don't want to see. And then the why is why does it support the author's argument? So how does it help to further develop the author's argument? Essentially, how does it contribute to either what you have for the contention or what the topic sentence? Some basic examples like this: use of statistical evidence enhances credibility, showcases the author's position as an expert in the field. And then other points, really, they should be very specific to the context of the article or text you have been given in terms of that why analysis. Now, the elements of text are crucial to understand not only for text response, but also for creating text, okay? So essentially, when this shows what you should be analyzing and how often you will be analyzing different things. So structural features is the bulk of your essay, essentially. They're absolutely necessary. They're at the bottom of the pyramid because they're very important. They're what will get you the high marks. So finding literary devices. It's easy if you're doing something like a film and you aim to keep a 50-50 balance between quotes versus film techniques. That will adequately achieve your requirement to have lots of structural features. But if you're doing even something like a novel, you should be finding imagery, symbolism, even plot and narrative devices you could analyze and talk about. Foreshadowing, so have a lot of structural features. Don't just have quotes. The other things that you'll have is characters as evidence. So quotes from characters. You know, Similarly, that's going to link into your analysis, and the analysis that you will have will be either thematic analysis or views and values. You should have both. So students often forget this, but views and values analysis, analyzing the authorial intent of the author throughout all of your paragraphs, putting it in multiple times, is what will give you the bulk of your marks and what assessors are really looking to differentiate between an average student and a above average student and a very good student is the views and values ideas. So this is really the crux of your essay. They should not only be included in your concluding sentence at the end of your introduction, each body paragraph, and conclusion, but they should also be included occasionally when discussing evidence. As a general rule of thumb, at least one more additional time per body paragraph. Okay. So similarly, when you write a creating text piece, especially if you're writing something like a short story, you need to embed these things within your piece yourself as the author. Structural features for your relevant genre, your characters and dialogue, themes, which is your framework, and views and values, your message about the framework. And that needs to be embedded fluently within your own text. Now, when looking for structural features, you should be looking for text-specific structural features, specific to your Section A text. So I've listed some examples on the slide here. You can see them all. This is not in any way an exhaustive list, but we're trying to, as we said, have more structural features within our body paragraphs, not just quotes. So if we see in this example, in the play Medea, the crucial conflict is between reason and passion. She is described as not a woman, but a lioness, with the nature more savage than a Tuscan Scylla, conveying her dehumanization as a result of her actions. Vocabulary is great here, but this is quote evidence, okay? See how we expand, and we're going into a structural feature. Animal imagery, or I should say animalistic imagery, is also employed when the nurse sees her glaring at them like a bull. You could have also referred to this as a simile. That would still be getting the job done. And how this parallels Medea's own savage temperament. And parallels are also a structural feature as well, drawing comparisons to another thing and saying the two are similar. Now, authorial intent gets the A's. This is what I said. Lots and lots of views and value statements, and impressive views and value statement is how you can differentiate from the rest of the state. So that's, whether you know it as views and values or authorial intent, those terms are interchangeable, and that's the same thing. These are all the messages that the author is trying to convey. We should also use suitable writer does words or authorial purpose verbs whenever we do views and values analysis. So have a nice vocabulary bank of all the positive, negative, and neutral writer does words like Negative would be critiques, condemns, condone, laments. Positive would be extols, applause, endorses. And then your neutral are the ones like depicts, portrays, illustrates, etc. Okay, so have many of those under your belt because that's a way to improve your vocabulary as well, but they should be included anytime you do views and values analysis. So, for instance, how do we do it? We have a structural feature, a metaphor. Then we still have to analyze, discuss what it represents. And then after that, we found a spot that this is where we can do authorial intent analysis. So we're going to expand that analysis and talk about the author's message in using that metaphor to represent that idea. So we have the description of the reflections of the Palace of the Republic as bent and brown. We analyze the metaphor, the intriguing nature of the description, and linking it to the palace history in East Germany. Then we expand on the authorial intent of this. Through this, the author is suggesting that even after their demise, the Stasi are still bending facts and fabricating fictions in order to seek control over East Germans. So see how that's a message embedded within from the author about the historical context. Good. So if we're looking to score highly, this is more section A specific, you should be addressing all of those 4 elements that we discussed in the pyramid, quoting often. Your quotes should be short and succinct and integrated and blended nicely into your sentences so they just flow within the sentence. They shouldn't look out of place. They should just integrate into the sentences. So using ellipses and square brackets and modifying your quotes and cutting them into shorter segments are all things that you should be doing. Focusing on structural features, not just analyzing characters, and plot should be avoided completely because plot is not evidence unless you have quotes behind it. And plot retell is ultimately the biggest thing to avoid and one of the biggest issues I see in students' essays and definitely the assessors, breaking apart their whole essays. So make sure you're not doing any plot retell. For any evidence that you use, very minimal context or background information is needed. It should be just a few words, really, of where you got that quote from. Authorial intent messages, do not memorize essays. Assessors will know that's feedback every year on the report, and these students get low marks. Essays need to fit prompts exactly, and the prompts in text response are too specific that you can come in with a memorized essay and replicate exactly what you had. It's not going to match the prompt. Answering the prompt, not deviating away from the core of the prompt. All arguments address all key terms, and we have a counter argument. We need to explore the complexity of the prompt. A counter argument is an expectation and a requirement, not an option. And arguments need to be centered on ideas rather than characters or examples, and there should not be character names, for instance, in your topic sentences. Additional things is how you're supposed to write about characters if you do choose to do it. You need to understand that characters are a construct that the author is put in their text to represent ideas, and they're not alive. Sounds basic, but students will write things like, oh, this indicates that character A is something ugly. That's quite mean. But you should be making it clear that the character is a construct of the author. So, for instance, you would be writing, the author portrays character A as an ugly being in order to, and then connect it to the message. Why are they being portrayed that way? Because they're just a construct. They relay some kind of idea. And making sure we understand that. So there's just a couple more examples on the slide here of that. Victor does not want to do this. That's bad. Shelley the author depicts the character as unwilling to do this. Making sure we're making clear they're being portrayed, they're being depicted as, but they're not doing anything on their own, okay? They're not thinking, they're not feeling, they're a construct. And then analyzing characters. When you're analyzing characters, make sure you're not just analyzing features of those characters and what this quote shows about who they are as a person. All of it needs to be linked to themes or views and values, and you cannot have one character per paragraph. Even if you want a character as the basis for a paragraph idea, you still need to include a piece of evidence or two from other characters still. and characters should never go in topic sentences. Make the statement broad and general instead, even if you do intend to use a primary character behind that topic sentence. So, for instance, the characters in I for Isabel have suppressed their emotions. Do you agree? We cannot write, you know, character 1 suppresses, character 2 suppresses, character 3 has not suppressed as our counter argument. So we need to focus on the broader ideas. For instance, the characters find it difficult to suppress their emotions because their past experiences have wounded them beyond repair. If we say we need to extend our topic sentence, this is not enough to say have an argument that basically just says I agree with the prompt. Why are they struggling to suppress their emotions? And notice all we need to do to make it general, we said the characters. Characters here, you can have characters there as well instead of saying names. Body paragraph 2, different approaches characters take to triumph over their emotions as another argument. And many characters are able to suppress their emotions to different extents, though none actually 100% succeed. So, you wouldn't put 100% as a topic sentence, but it's the idea there. All right, more section A specific revision. So this is your analytical essay, and you can do either text that you prefer, your unit 3 text or your unit 4 text. Now it's worth a third of exam marks and is marked by 2 assessors who give it a mark out of 10. Each section is worth a third of exam marks. Essentially, the way that marking works is the score given to you from each assessor is added up, and the maximum score is a 20 really, and that makes for your final mark. So each essay does get marked by 2 assessors no matter which section. It's important to know your criteria, so what you're being assessed on, knowledge and understanding of the text, the ideas and issues it explores. So that's all about evidence in a way as well that you use, your structural features, your quotes, and your ability to analyze. That's further reinforced by the development of a coherent analysis in response to the topic. So both dot point 1 and dot point 2 draw on the importance that shows that analysis will be the bulk of your marks, and especially your views and values analysis, your knowledge and understanding of the text, use of textual evidence, and your control and effectiveness of language use, your ability to write well. Now, the types of prompts we see in text response. How can we spot them? So I've removed from this character-based prompts because technically students have been doing them in school this year, but Vika has said that they have removed them from the exam and there will not be character-based prompts on the exam. However, again, I've noticed a lot of students are still doing them in school, but because this is catered to exam prep, I've taken it off. So different prompt actions, how indicates a structural features prompt. That's very specific. It will say something like, how does author's name construct something something, for instance. And they usually start with how, and it indicates your analysis must be heavily around structural features more so than just character quotes. And that's an expectation. So sometimes they sound very easy, but don't pick them if you're not confident in analyzing structural features. That's very important. Now, discuss, do you agree? To what extent do you agree? Why? Pretty much, look, every single prompt action indicates you need a counter argument. You need a counter argument either way. Now, in terms of the big picture prompts, thematic and views and values are very popular among students, and I love them as well. Thematic is basically your standard prompt. That's about a theme or a couple of themes, contrasting a couple of themes that are the opposite of each other, the antithesis of each other, perhaps. And with a thematic prompt, that's very straightforward. Students usually very used to those. But views and values prompts, students will generally address the same. How we can spot them is they state a message of the author or director or whatever it is, and essentially compel you to either agree or disagree with that message. With our views and values prompts, we should be analyzing views and values more often, is the expectation. And you can write views and values based topic sentences that state messages about the author and what the author is trying to convince of in relation to the essay prompt. Your topic sentences don't just have to be those general sort of statements that are usually around themes. They can be views and values, um, statements that you're trying to prove essentially in the rest of the body paragraph. That's an optional thing that you might do sometimes, but they do have a nice ring to them if you indicate that the author has this message and that's what you're going to try to prove for the rest of the body paragraph. Now, importantly, rote learning is great and you might feel like it builds confidence for you. But if your essay doesn't match the prompt, then what is the point? You're only eligible for low marks because assessors assign essays a holistic mark based on the quality of the overall response. And those 4 sections of the rubric that we looked at, they're looking at how your piece of writing fits into each box in the rubric. And that means if it's falling really high in some of the boxes but really low in the others, the marks will be lower. Okay. And they smell memorized essay a mile away because the essay doesn't answer the prompt directly. So that just doesn't mean sprinkling key terms, but writing very specifically in response to the prompt. What can you memorize? You can come in with memorized quotes. You need to come in with memorized quotes and evidence. And you can even memorize the analytical ideas you associate that evidence with. That's probably much more productive too, because instead of memorizing a full essay, you could memorize a bunch of evidence and what you want to analyze about it. And that's got much more benefit to you anyway than just having one memorized essay ready. Um, so, breaking down prompts, taking a look at what we actually need to do. The prompt is after darkness. In after darkness, friendship is the primary powerful force for good. Do you agree? So, how your contention and your arguments are linked. Your contention needs to envelop the ideas of all of your topic sentences to draw an overall conclusion, which is your main interpretation and response to the prompt, clearly indicating whether you agree or disagree with the essay prompt and your main reason as to why you feel that way. With contentions, I prefer to have the topic sentences for my essays written first so that I can make a strong contention after I have my topic sentences. That's my preference and that's why I recommend. And your topic sentences are like kind of like your why. Why do you believe what you do in the contention? All of the free ideas that build up to what was your contention statement. So, an example would be while friendship promotes good throughout the text, one must also consider broader determining factors that create good in this microcosm of World War II. Microcosm, fancy word for setting. So we clearly see both a main argument as well as a little counter argument present within that statement. Now, argument 1, friendship allows characters to move on from their past. Okay, so that's one clear benefit, showing friendship is the primary powerful force for good. Another one, friendship gives characters the means to consider different perspectives. And then a counter argument. While friendship is important for good, exposure to a greater world allows one to see their faults in a more definitive light. That's our counter argument saying something else other than friendship is more important in the text. So, how we actually break down prompts, you should first highlight the key terms so you understand what needs to be discussed. Don't skip this part and don't leave out an important area of discussion. It's important to highlight all of our key terms so we don't miss anything. And assessors will often put words together in a prompt that seem kind of like similar ideas, but they're not supposed to be regarded as synonyms. You need to address each differently. That's why it's good to have a dictionary too, because even if they seem almost synonymous, they have a slightly different like meaning to them, and you need to treat them as separate things you need to have an argument about. Okay. If it helps you to write your contention, you can turn your prompt into a question, just rewrite it into a question format. Sometimes that helps students. That's an optional step. And then you answer that question. Figure out first whether you agree or disagree. Write your topic sentences first to help you fully decide on that as well. And after you've got your topic sentences, develop your contention. To help you come up with those arguments, just questioning everything is what you need to do. So, you know, a bit of a tip for you guys, you might get prompts where you feel like there's no way I can make a counter argument for this essay. The prompt just doesn't allow for it. But asking something like, "Oh, is it just like, can I just say that another theme instead of this theme, or another theme instead of this theme is the central one, or the one that like this, the one that we just looked at? It was asking if friendship achieves good. So a counter argument would just be something else other than friendship is even more important. And look for implications and consequences. They make for good ideas for topic sentences. Framing an argument around consequences or outcomes of something. Now, we see an example here. So, first, highlighting the key terms. Despite Atwood's portrayal of Gilead as soulless and destructive, she has nevertheless succeeded in giving the reader a sense of optimism. To what extent do you agree? So, our key terms, is Gilead actually being portrayed as soulless and destructive? Not to conflate the two, we need to treat them as separate. So, we need to show, let's imagine we agree, him being soulless, like um pretty much emotionless, numb, and like evil, and destructive means, destroying things like relationships, doing really negative things. So soulless is more an emotional, and destructive is more an actual physical consequence and action we can see. And then optimism, where is the optimism in the text from? What happens? And does Atwood, the author, actually succeed in creating a sense of optimism as well? Another thing we need to address. So then we're rephrasing the prompt into a question to make it easier to write a contention statement. Despite Atwood's portrayal of Gilead as soulless and destructive, does she succeed in giving the reader a sense of optimism? See how that can kind of help, because now you've just got a chance to answer a question directly, and that might make your contention a little bit better and easier. Now we question it. So by raising questions to the prompt is how we can come up with topic sentence ideas. So, is Gilead completely soulless? Can we argue with that? Does Atwood succeed in giving the reader optimism? Is that actually what the text is about? Is this what even she set out to do? That could be a counter argument. She wasn't trying to achieve optimism. What optimism is afforded? Where is this optimism from? What happens? Why is there optimism? What's the purpose of that? Is the optimism due to Atwood's portrayal of Gilead, or in spite of it, is it something else that creates the optimism? So then we come up with dot point topic sentences. Like I said, you should not be doing a long plan, less than 5 minutes on the exam. So dot point ideas is perfectly acceptable. Our overall contention could be Atwood's Handmaid's Tale is a harsh admonition of regressive theocracy. Theocracy referring to outdated belief system, and patriarchal hegemony, offering a sense of optimism only in its reformation. So we've got a patriarchal society with a horrible belief system, and the only sense of optimism is from the fact that things might change. So clearly, we're showing that we disagree with the optimism idea, and we are showing that there is soullessness and destructiveness. Um, so the counter argument is going to be about the optimism that things are going to get better maybe in Handmaid's Tale. So Atwood celebrates the endeavor of the human spirit. So we can start with a bit of the positive things that we do see. Ability to prevail despite this regressive theocracy, perhaps. Yet Atwood portrays a powerfully dismal state of humanity. So see how that's not saying this is Gilead, but it is going to be about Gilead. Okay, this is going to be talking about his soulless and destructive. Whereas the endeavor of the human spirit maybe will even include something positive about Gilead. And then that final counter argument, always start with something like, ultimately, on the other hand, signpost that it's a counter argument at the head of that sentence. Ultimately, Atwood does not succeed in affording a sense of optimism, as she did not set out to do so. Rather, she warns of the fatality of certain socio-political values. She indicates how she creates a you know, like a utopia, but a lot of people are suffering in this utopia. Um, okay, so how do you actually write your body paragraph arguments? You can follow a bit of a systematic structure. This is what I like. A couple of notes here as well. This is what I raised before. If you needed to write a counter argument for a thematic prompt, is there another theme that is ultimately more central to the text, or another reason why a theme or idea is represented? That can be the only way to write a counter argument sometimes, so keep that in mind. Same for characters. Was there another character that better represented the idea that the prompt was discussing? So, look, this and what I have on the next slide is the same thing. So don't worry that I skipped forward, but I feel like it makes more sense in this format. So let's read this one instead. Now, so the structure that you can follow for your topic sentences and layering them is you can first start by answering the prompt itself, kind of going tunnel vision. So that's just basically saying agree with the prompt, showing ways it is correct. Okay, so if it's raising soullessness and destructiveness, this argument is just going to be about how Gilead's soullessness and destructiveness manifests and either the cause of his qualities or the consequences, implications of him being that way. And then you go into a however, not blindly acknowledging the prompt, considering a different perspective. That can be your counter argument. And then you can end with exploring new nuanced views and values. And this final topic sentence will literally be in a views and values format. Ultimately, this is what the author is intending to do because of what I said in topic sentence 1 and topic sentence 2. So this, what we just looked at, is an example of a views and values based topic sentence there for anyone wondering how you may do that. Good. So, yeah, summarizing, we do not divide body paragraphs by characters, and we do not completely agree or disagree with the prompt. Assessors will not like to see if you haven't got a counter argument. So when you choose your position, you cannot be neutral, you cannot completely agree or completely disagree. You need to be somewhere in between, mostly agree or mostly disagree, and then one counter argument for the other point of view. Okay, reviewing essay structure for text response. So what we need to do. So we should always start with a context sentence addressing the context of the text. We do not talk about the author's life or summarize the text here. So, you know, you should just introduce author's full name, mention then the text type or genre of the text as well, if relevant, the time period, so it's 1950s. Um, then put down the full title, and then you can write something like explores, and the rest, the second part of that context sentence should be in relation to your prompt. And it should be different every time. So you can come in with the first half of a context sentence memorized, but from that part on where you try to define what the text is about, that should always be in relation to the prompt. That shouldn't be a general statement. Then you need to go into your contention, which we already looked at, and then your outline of arguments where you essentially signpost each one of your topic sentences, but using completely different words, making sure you're not repeating yourself. Personally, I really don't like the outline of arguments, the 3 sentences you dedicate to each topic sentence. And if you look at examiners' reports, lots of the high scoring students, you would rarely, if ever, see them signposting all 3 topic sentences. So my preference and what I used to do and what I recommend everyone do is to instead write a detailed contention that you expand upon. So write a longer sentence providing your main contention, you know, whether you agree or disagree or why, and then dedicate a separate sentence to your counter argument. That way, you have an expanded contention. You've kind of outlined your arguments anyway. It's much more interesting to read, and you're not going to be sitting there struggling to find synonyms within your body paragraphs. Lastly, like every other paragraph, you need to close with views and values or authorial intent message. And that should be again in every paragraph. Because it's just your intro, it's okay if you can't come up with anything impressive here. it can be something a bit more simple for your introduction than what you'll hopefully have for your body paragraphs and conclusion. So we see an example here. How do the characters in Persepolis demonstrate the impact of conflict between tradition and modernity? Um, so the first context sentence is great at revealing the socio-political context of the text, even though I would say that, it doesn't need to be so long. Really doesn't. Probably a little bit too much. So as 20th century Iran underwent violent and rapid government changes from the Shah's westernizing autocracy, a divorce between tradition and modernity began to accelerate and permeate all aspects of Iranian life. So, look, it does introduce the context beautifully, but it doesn't need to be so long. Notice that the student didn't put the name of the text and the author's name at the initial sentence. That's okay if you do that. I would say you will have no problems with assessors if it's in your second sentence. But it does flow more nicer structurally if it goes in your first sentence, those textual details. Then we see a contention that clearly answers how we see the conflict between tradition and modernity. So characters either provide commentary on or examples of the struggle to reconcile 2,500 years of Persian civilization with modernity. Clearly, we're indicating that we agree there is a negative impact and there is a conflict between the two, resulting in a confusing identity crisis for Iranians on the individual, national, and global scale. Clearly indicated the main reason why identity crisis, and in terms of three different factors: individual, national, and global. So that's really good. And a stylistic quote has been used. You are fine to use stylistic quotes anywhere as long as it's not evidence that you're actually going to analyze. Remember, there shouldn't be any evidence in your intro, but you can certainly use stylistic quotes that are just there because they fit what you're trying to say within the sentence. They're usually just descriptive, very short quotes, 1 to 2 words. Um, then we see views and values combined with the breakdown of ideas, so further expanding on what's going to be within the topic sentences as well. Satrapi ultimately concludes, as long as there is absolute separatism between familiarity with Eastern tradition and the freedom offered by Western modernity, conflicts and suffering will continue to rise, and therefore encourages her Western audiences to sympathize with Iranians' painful experience on a humanitarian level rather than fearfully judge an entire nation by the wrongdoings of a few extremists. Another stylistic quote, which is fine. Um, so that's clearly going to be an argument that an implication is going to be the conflict and suffering. And the last one, which is going to be around views and values and the author's intention, that she's encouraging sympathy with Iranians from the audience, and that they shouldn't be judged, they're not at fault. So that achieves both views and values as well as all the topic sentences broken down here as well. You can see that highlighted in separate colors for what is what, but I've already explained it. Good. So for body paragraphs, the key thing that I want you to know, everyone knows what teal is. Topic sentence, evidence explain, concluding sentence to conclude. And I will say, like, have at least 4 pieces of evidence per body paragraph for your analytical essays, though please note that it's not so much about the volume of evidence that you have, how much analysis you have is more important. So if you have 4 examples, but you only write a 1 sentence analysis for each quote, that's not enough. You should be finding areas within your essay where you can expand your analysis and explore that idea a little bit further. You should be finding a way to extend your analytical ideas. So, teal works. It's about the content you put in within that teal that makes your essay complex and sophisticated, that sets you above the state. And it's not about writing some kind of unstructured piece. You should stick with teal. Don't do anything else other than teal, because this is what they're looking for English, and it works. But key things with teal is, and some things that students miss, is your topic sentences are your sub arguments in response to your contention. If you did have a signpost of all of your topic sentences rather than that expanded contention I was talking about in your introduction, make sure you've reworded completely your topic sentences, and they're not the same as what you've got in your introduction as your outline of arguments. They need to be relevant to your prompt. Each of them are effectively answering the prompt in some way, and nothing is left unaddressed. No key terms are left unaddressed by the end. So our rules for them is no quotes unless you have a stylistic quote like we talked about, not one that you're going to analyze. It's just there because it makes your sentence even better pretty much, and it's descriptive. No specific evidence, including character names. If you can avoid them, most of the time you can. And it needs to be an argument, not just a statement. So to make sure that you've done the right thing and your topic sentence is actually an argument, look back to your topic sentence and see if it raises that question for you. Okay, tell me how. Then you're on the right track and you have something that can be proved in the rest of your body paragraph. Now, what's the difference between topic sentences versus concluding sentences? So, importantly, the two need to be interlinked. So, students need to make sure their topic sentences are linked with their concluding sentence. So, the topic sentence says, this is a key idea, the idea that I'm trying to prove. Whereas the concluding sentence is essentially a views and values statement. But the views and value statement needs to be about what is in the topic sentence. This is what the author says about this idea that's in my topic sentence. Okay? So as an example, a topic sentence could be, although some characters seek to overcome their social disadvantages, many of them struggle to improve their lives in the face of prejudice. And then a views and values to close. Thus, the text reveals the perilous and often emotionally taxing journey the characters must undertake before being able to triumph over society's expectations. So it's interlinked because it's talking about social disadvantages, and it links back in by talking about triumph over society's expectations. Okay, so make sure you make the most of your concluding sentences. Try to scatter very impressive views and values ideas there, because assessors will pay a lot of attention to what's at the start and at the end of each paragraph. That's just, the way memory works, but also because topic sentences and concluding sentences are important parts that they're looking to see what you've done for them. Now we see an example here of how they're interlinked. So Burial writes, I'm run through and through with disaster. I'm knifed to the hilt with fate. To what extent is Agnes responsible for her own suffering? So the topic sentence gives this clear idea. Kent contrasts the archival document in the novel with rich, saga-like imagery and symbolism to reinforce the challenges placed upon Agnes. We see in this case that the reason it's introducing kind of like the things that are going to be in the paragraph is because it's being treated as like a bit of a structural prompt. But it's not possible to avoid using the character's name in the statement because the prompt literally says, to what extent is Agnes responsible for her suffering? So we can forgive that, and we're giving specific examples that show the challenges placed upon her. That's what the prompt is asking. What is Agnes's suffering, and is she responsible? So we're going to try to show what examples of suffering for Agnes that we see in the text, and it's okay to put that in the topic sentence. It's not actually being analyzed in the next sentence or anything like that. It's being listed what we will use. And then the authorial intent about that idea, hence by contrasting the sterile epigraphs with Agnes's first person narration, so we're summarizing what was just discussed before that point, can prompt her readers to feel that Agnes's fate was largely due to outside societal influences, so she is not responsible for her own suffering. See how that's linked with the topic sentence, because we said challenges are placed upon Agnes, not a cause of her, but there's challenges in her life that are from outside forces. What else is wonderful about this paragraph? And feel free to pause and have a closer look, but the quotes are really short and sharp and succinct. This is what we want to see. If we can keep it for 5 to 7 words, that would be ideal. There's also so many structural features being used in this paragraph. Even though it's so short, there's just so much substance. So we see rich saga-like imagery, archival documents, metaphorical voice to Agnes, first person narration is and voice are even being discussed. So see, when it's broken out like this, you can kind of see it's not so difficult to embed structural features. In fact, in this paragraph, it's still a lot of quotes and actual textual evidence that's being analyzed, but we're just combining the structural features onto it, or even where a quote that we've used is some kind of structural feature, we're making sure that we identify that to get those marks. Now, your conclusion should be a really straightforward wrap up, as simple as 3 to 4 sentences or even 2 to 3 sentences. So, first of all, you should restate your contention and expand. It should not be reworded from your intro, it should be much more complex too, because by this stage you've written the whole essay and explored the topic in detail, so that contention can be refined and specific. And then you should be ending on the message of the text. So, this is your mic drop moment. You want to make sure this is a strong, impactful ending, because this is what the last thing that your assessor will see. And your conclusion should be your most strong views and values message for that reason. Um, so some ideas, if you struggle to come up with something else for views and values, you can think about what the author aims to teach. So think to a modern audience, what would they want them to get from the text as well? Or how they aim to challenge their readers, or is there something that they want us to notice when helping you to craft these statements? So key advice, this is our exam advice for section A. Don't make mistakes listed in examiner's report. It reads essentially the same every single year because students keep making the same mistakes. So if you read through examiner's reports, identify your own weaknesses and make sure you remove them, you will do much better for your results. That's a really effective method of studying itself, is studying the examiner's reports. You've also got excerpts from high scoring responses that you can use to highlight and annotate, to find some fancy words, some good essay structures that you want to replicate and practice actually doing that. That's a way that I try to improve my own writing. I just went on the examiner's reports and tried to replicate a little bit what those responses were doing, even if it wasn't my text. Structural and vocabulary things that I try to do. Read critical articles. Don't just read like Quizlet quotes and analysis and schmoop. Go on to Google Scholar or the State Library website, look up the name of your text, and try to find articles from critics about your text where they analyze, and they'll have impactful views and values ideas as well. And these are an invaluable source because you can take those ideas just for yourself and it will seem so impressive to your assessors. It's great for views and values and thematic analysis in particular. Developing strong interpretations, which we've kind of covered, but if you don't do a good plan and if you don't have a strong contention and strong topic sentences, you won't have that hearty discussion of authorial intent that we need for a high scoring essay. Add analysis into your quote banks. Don't just have quotes. Write dot point analytical ideas and revise your notes with all of your quotes and analysis constantly, and that will imprint them into your head for the exam. Not just the quotes, but the idea you associate them with. So adding analysis into each quote in your quote bank will make sure you're not summarizing. You will have a variety of different ideas. It won't get repetitive, and your analysis will be really impressive, hopefully, as well. It's also actually easier to remember quotes when you associate them with an idea, not just stand alone. So it helps with memorization as well. Practice planning essays is the best thing, and it's also the least time consuming thing. I think for my Section A text, I had like 45 prompts in total for my text, not just from past exams, but like my teacher has supplied as well. And I just did so many practice prompt brainstorms. Very, very effective. You can give yourself 10 minutes on each prompt to just do your best and then later cut it to 5 minutes thinking about exam time. And this way you will be prepared for every prompt possible and make sure you're not missing any type of specific prompt that you could get. Now, for the exam, pick the topic you want to do from section A at the beginning of reading time, but then go to section C. Okay, you should be spending the majority of your reading time planning your argument analysis task. There's 15 minutes reading time. By that time, you should be able to have a full plan for the article in your head and know exactly what to do when that writing time starts. So you just read section A and B, but then spend the majority of time in section C. Still pick the topic. When that reading time is up, you can write down a short plan of what will eventually become your paragraphs. I personally like to do it one thing at a time. So I used to, yeah, I would definitely pick my prompt, but and think about it just a little bit. But I just used to do section C undistracted. I would then go to section A, and then I would do section B last. It's better not to have your mind boggled by too many ideas and getting all confused. But if this works for you and it's not distracting, writing a plan, for section A and section C, and you don't miss out on any ideas or forget anything, if you do that, then you could use the strategy. All right, on to crafting text. So, first of all, your criteria. You're expected to develop meaningful ideas. This is all about having a strong purpose, a very complex message in relation to your framework that can be identified from your writing. Creating a purposeful text for a specific context audience. So remember that purpose, audience, and context are requirements of this task. We will talk about them in a little bit more detail. Experiment with vocabulary and text structures. You are expected to, whatever text type you write in, to comprehensively incorporate genre features of that text type and structural elements so that it looks like a really good example of, like, if you're doing a short story, it's definitely following the conventions and the structural features of a short story. If you're doing persuasive speech, it's just like how you would expect to see another oral persuasive speech. So a lot of marks will be assigned to actually incorporating those genre features too. Explore, employ a sustained and individual voice. It's clear that there's a voice in your writing, and then your general writing skills as well. So, first of all, talking about creating purposeful text, we should have a clear and stated purpose. First of all, decide what you're aiming to do. Are you trying to express a certain point, reflect on something, explain or argue something? So choose your actual purpose and then wrap your message around that and around your framework. Make sure the plot or whatever the content of your creative is going to be, it is something that is not too far-fetched and can link to the message that you're trying to create. Yeah, so your purpose should be clear to the assessor reading, that there was a goal or an aim that you wanted to achieve through the text. You needed to have planned for this adequately to make sure that that goal is clear to your assessor, that purpose you're trying to prove. And so again, yeah, planning and refining your piece is crucial to make sure that your message and also like links to the framework are embedded throughout, and it's consistent, and it's uh, a good piece. So making sure that we don't have simple ideas as well is going to be important. The messages that you make should be important, and they should be implied. They shouldn't be written out like these statements, unless you're doing a, maybe if you're doing something like an article or an opinion piece, of course you can get away with actually stating your message because the text type allows for it. But if you're doing something like a short story, a diary entry, the point of view narrative, a memoir, the message should actually just be implied, but kind of something you can read between the lines. So what to do and what not to do. Bad is simple ideas. So protest is hard. Complex idea would be protest is hard because it involves clashes in ideologies and strongly held beliefs, meaning that for one side to succeed, another often has to fail. There we go. That's a complex message there, that protest is sort of a battle between different ideologies. And we can have a look at the upper ones. Now, vocabulary and text structures, this criteria is all about your ability to write and genre features as well. So remember, I stressed the importance. Like, literally get pieces up of the text type that you want to write in. So say you prefer doing short stories. So get short stories up that you like or that you found and annotate them and see what the author does. How do they make the plot evolve and culminate? And what kind of genre features and literary devices do they incorporate? That can guide how you should write your piece to help achieve this requirement on the rubric. Your language also needs to be catered to the audience you are targeting. So that means, some things that students will do is have a, direct address to their audience, but it should be clear that the language that you're using is targeting a specific audience, not just anyone or no one. So, and make sure it appeals to the audience group that you're aimed to target, and the language used matches what we would expect from that audience group. And yeah, in part, a lot of planning should go into that as well. You can consider how your mentor text targeted audiences that you studied. That's another great way, because they all really do target a specific audience, and try to get ideas from that. So just a quick overview of the four frameworks. We will be looking today at the actual sample exam that Vika has included, because I want to talk through it with you guys in order to help you. But first, review of frameworks. Popular question: can you change your framework and do a different framework than the one you did in school in your classes? You could, but be very careful. I feel like anyone and everyone could do personal journeys, even if you haven't studied it at all, because it's so broad and easy to get. But any other framework, I would say, does require a bit of research and input into it and time spent with it. So I would be really cautious of that. After all, if you've been writing on a set framework, you've definitely improved writing about that idea a lot over the years. So, optional, but be careful with doing that, and have a good think if write pieces as well and compare with the older framework versus the new one you want to use. Anyways, writing about country is the exploration of place and belonging. So some of the ideas and what you can write about and address: of course, physical land and country, things like migration, or even just moving, not necessarily outside of the country, local and international travel, appreciation of the natural landscape, historical events like war, loss of country, dispossession, remembering country, nostalgia, cultural identity, what brings people together within a country, the power of connection of people living in one land, and then modern topics like climate change and the changing landscape as well. Yeah. Now for protest, this is a very narrow topic, so um, pretty straightforward to understand what is expected for you, but you need to explore conflict and contest. So ideas will include things like what it means to protest, the value of protest, outcomes, personal stories, struggle and war, and how people are united by protest. And I guess that feeling of, even if we're from all different backgrounds and have so many differences, this idea, fighting for this idea or this protest, has brought us together. So that's the kind of thing you might be writing about as well, that unity in protest. Say if you got a stimulus like this, because we see many people together and they're very united. Um, and you could be exploring success and failure in protest, and what leads to success or failure, or the ability for a protest leader or one person or a very small group of people to inspire a larger group of people in the broader community to protest for something. When writing about personal journeys, these are explorations of life or biographical explorations. Almost anything is a personal journey. But the key for this framework is to understand that your message or purpose needs to be around how an experience or a journey has changed you and improved you. So this is at the crux of what the framework is the idea of change, and the message needs to be around the idea of change. So anything from travels, relationships, friendships, um, changing career, um, you know, doing some kind of something for self development for yourself, people's stories, people's life stories, the most significant experiences of their life or your life, or just one significant experience, reflecting back upon your life and what was significant in it, um, and change in general, anything that causes internal change and self growth. When writing about play, we're exploring experiences and traditions of play. We generally do associate this with childhood play, but we know that there is so much more. Um, Adult and adolescent play is a big part of it as well. Any hobby, pretty much, games, sport, acting, music, language, images, any hobby that you could have. It's also associated with relaxation, with things like sleeping, with things like reading. Um, Even some careers could be considered playful. Um, you know, yeah, so also collaboration and connection or competitiveness that can stem from play are all topics. But this framework can ask you to consider things like, what does play bring to your life? So consider childhood imaginative play, bringing creativity and ability to look upon the world through a different lens in children. How play contributes to kids' development as well as another topic, or how can play represent the real world in a nutshell. Now, purpose and audience and context need to be enveloped within your piece no matter what text type you're doing. So remember this, your context can be modern, that is okay, but you should still have a purpose, a clear message, and an audience that you're aiming to target. So, in terms of purpose, you need to be doing at least one of these. One is fine, you could be doing multiple. So, you're either expressing something about your framework, explaining, reflecting, or arguing. So, to explain is to be informative. That could be like a feature article, a podcast transcript. To argue is to write something like an opinion piece or an oral persuasive speech with a clear argument. To reflect, that could be something like a memoir or a blog post detailing and say you're doing country and the interesting aspects and the history of a single country. And expressing can be those things as well, like short stories, diary entries, focusing more obviously around feelings, how something makes you feel emotionally and spiritually. Now, again, context, if you do go for a different context than modern, then consider how you're going to target audiences of the past. I guess if your text is situated in the past, how will you have to modify your language to reflect that? If it's modern, that's fine. You won't have to worry about that. Now, audience, you are expected to have a select target audience for your creative, and the more specific you can get about that target audience, the greater quality will be of your creative piece and the better you'll match this criteria. Now, explicitly stating what your audience is, especially if you're writing like a really creative piece, like a short story or something, isn't something that you should be doing. It should just be implied from the language that you use. This is a skill. It's not easy. I'm not saying it is easy, but you need to show that you are targeting some kind of specific audience. So, some students still struggle to decide what to write and how they want to write. So, thinking about how to think about what text forms are best for you to write in. Well, the truth is you need to practice writing in a variety of different text forms in order to be able to answer this question. So you're not going to be able to bypass the fact that you should be experimenting to find what you are best at. So if you haven't been doing that, start doing it and start writing pieces in different text types. And never do it without research. You should never attempt to write in a text type without having researched it and knowing how you're going to go about it. Do the whole thing of what I said, either restudying a mentor text, picking it back up, or finding a piece of that text type, highlighting, annotating it, and see what the author did with it and trying to replicate that. But you can pick a category of writing that you are best in and want to focus on. So imaginative writing is great for all of our students that love creative writing, writing stories, writing memoirs, writing point of view narratives, perhaps. Informative style will aim to inform without having an argument, essentially. That's great if you like doing an article or an essay or a blog post, perhaps, although a blog post could be persuasive as well. A podcast, for instance. And then persuasive would be like your opinion pieces and oral persuasive speeches. Essentially, I have put a bit of a list of different text forms you could do, and some of them I haven't been referring to. Like, you could even write a letter, you could even write an interview. Now, poem, song, and verse is actually not allowed on the exam because I'm assuming the word count wouldn't be enough. That is the problem. So I've said you cannot choose this if there is a minimum word count that is substantial. It's expected on the exam that you have a substantial word count. So read through it because I've kind of tried to write down some of the considerations when choosing, like diary entry is a popular genre. It's one of the easier ones because you can quite literally just write a stream of consciousness. And it's not heavily structured either, and it can be very personal, and it can really clearly achieve the purpose of to express feelings, express how your day was or something that happened that day. So here we see more with their text types sort of written down. A monologue is a pretty cool one as well. This you can write just a series of thoughts. Um, and it doesn't have to be heavily structured as well. So maybe some ideas, if some students are still struggling, maybe you're getting some easier ideas that you could experiment with, essentially. So let's see some examples. We'll look at an example of a plan. We'll look at an example of a student piece. They're not perfect, but they are pretty great, and you can clearly see that they try to achieve criteria as well. So this one's just a plan for play. We see that this stimulus is quite limiting. So if I got a stimulus like this on the exam, I would have no doubt that my piece has to be about travel, international travel specifically, and that's what I have to write about. Uh, or not necessarily. Look, like you could interpret as the whole globe is included, so it could just be travel and experiences while traveling. So, student plan, text type to choose for this would be a blog post. See how audience, purpose, and context are all there as well to make sure we're ticking off everything on the rubric that we need. So we want our message to be around travel as a form of play because it provides opportunities to unwind, explore different cultures and places, and expand our understanding of the world. There are different forms of travel. It's not necessarily just international travel, but even could be in the form of like local travel and interstate travel. So, getting to a very specific audience here. Young adults who want to explore travel while they're younger. Uni students specifically, or future uni students considering taking a gap year to travel. The context will be modern and the persona will be someone that has done it themselves, a uni student that has done a gap year and is going to share their experiences and why this is so worthwhile and achieve that message of unwinding, learning about different cultures and places, and importantly, expanding understanding of the world. So by including this, you can see how we're definitely really closely going to link our message to the stimulus because it's got the globe there. So we're trying to expand understanding of the world. And this is a rough draft of what a plan could look like. So look, you don't need to do it in dot points like this if this looks a bit messy and scattered to you. But this is realistically what an initial rough draft should look like. As you actually start writing this, you'll notice that you might add or modify or even take out some things. But that first plan that you do should just be a free flow of a variety of ideas that you think, oh, might be fun to include. And then you might actually change as you go, or you might even write a second little plan draft as well. That's a bit more organized. But this is a good example of just like free flow of ideas of what to include in this piece, which is great. So when we introduce that blog post, we want to start with a bit of a hook. So for instance, are you thinking of traveling or taking a gap year to travel? That clearly indicates who our audience is as well because it mentions gap year, but links to the topic very nicely as well. Then to introduce the benefits of travel and make connections to play in this section. Then covering different forms of travel and this notion that it's accessible to everyone, doesn't have to be international. Thinking about how to make it entertaining because this is a blog post. So we want to introduce the persona, the idea that the persona wanted to travel, had no money as a recent graduate, and just decided to spend the year traveling Australia and living and driving around in a van. We want to focus on that anecdotal evidence and really hone in to make it entertaining and embed the messages around play. So things like the van breaking down in the middle of nowhere, getting a travel license to work in different parts of the world later on, maybe question mark. I know it says Australia, so potentially not. Wildlife, cultural shocks, bogans in regional areas, comparing impressions of major cities and putting a bit of humor there and which is better and why. And then they want to focus getting a little bit more serious, leading towards the message more, talking directly to the uni students and why they should take a gap year. Link to things that are very audience specific with the language, such as discussing burnout, realizing that after grad, if you work full time, you never can have these experiences, and then linking to the message ultimately. So that's a good little plan. Now, this stimulus was actually from the sample exam for personal journeys. So when we do our exam breakdown, I won't talk about it again. I will talk about it now. But this image stimulus shows a person straying off the road and following their own path. So this means making a brave and bold choice, and even if you have to do it alone, even if no one is supporting you, going off the path and doing something massive to change your life, a big change. Peace must be about that. And this is a point of view vignette. So this is a fun little style if you have never written it. That is, quite fun to write, definitely. So this one, I won't read the whole thing because it will be too time consuming. You have it on the slide so you can read the whole thing, but I will just talk about some things about it, okay? So point of view vignette, when the persona is 7 years old, I think astronauts are the coolest people in the world. They get to go to outer space and everyone thinks they're heroes. Yesterday, I made a space helmet with mom. I've also been creating blueprints of what my own spaceship is going to look like when I'm older. But then I realized that spaceships cost a lot of money, so I asked around what job will make me the richest when I'm an adult. I found out that neurosurgeons make a lot of money and decided to become a neurosurgeon. But then I realized that neurosurgery was really boring and decided I could just be a pilot instead. Mum says it is easier to become a pilot than an astronaut, and I really want to learn to fly a plane. When I do it in video games, it's so much fun and easy, so I know I'll be good at it. So I love how this embeds the language of a 7-year-old kid and the fantasies very, very nicely. So notice how effectively that's adopting genre features of a point of view vignette, and it reads as fun and playful, and it can definitely get those marks not only for genre features but targeting an audience, because later on it goes into adulthood and it seems that piece is more about the adulthood aspect. Okay, so to summarize, there's some year 12 language that you would expect in here as well, but the persona is 17 years old, decides to go into business. Okay, can't wait for it to happen. Then the persona is 30 years old and has been working in business, has gotten rich and successful, and there is talk about this. So language that we would expect from a young adult. They love their money, but getting depressed and getting overwhelmed by the job, missing out on important things. By the time the persona is 40 years old, the persona makes the drastic change and walks off that path onto their own path and takes the risk. Did I really need so much money? There are people who need help in this world, even right here on my doorstep in Melbourne. I don't need fancy cars or a mansion. I need to help people and be able to give back. Started a charity called Helping Hands, here to provide a helping hand to communities in Melbourne doing it tough. Since creating Helping Hands, I've downsized to a small apartment in the CBD and own no vehicle. This money saved helps me to fund the charity and services, including a food bank and job seeking assistance. The thousands of people the charity and its volunteers have helped make this operation all worth it, finally putting my business skills to good use. I now live a fulfilling life that I enjoy, improving people's lives. The lavish lifestyle was good, but this was better. So, a meaningful message about personal journeys. The notion that it's not about what you accomplish during your life, it's about the fulfillment that you'll be able to feel at the end of your life that will make you happy and make you a good person from doing things that are meaningful. And career is a big part of life. So, doing something that's not meaningful is going to be a trap, essentially. So, this piece shows that. Um, and is a beautiful way. The stimulus was incorporated perfectly, and we see meaningful audience, purpose, context, like those elements being incorporated really well. Okay, so I wanted to do the V-Class sample exam breakdown because this is a new area of study and this is the only resource that you have, and go through the creating text section. Just having a quick chat about what the stimuluses are about and what your writing ideas could be. So again, you can see song, poetry, and verse are not included. The only text types you can't write. You choose one framework. The title that's given has to apply to all students, so your piece must match the title. And you have to choose one piece of stimulus material. You need to have a purpose, explain, express, reflect, or argue. And there needs to be fluency for your selection of vocabulary, text structures, and language features. So being able to write very well in the text form you've chosen. We'll go through one by one. Okay, good. So first of all, writing about country. My country is calling. Nice and broad. It's going to fit any piece. Stimulus one. It's always a statement for the first stimulus, then it's an image for the second, and then it's for the third, it's a little poem excerpt. Okay, so you can see that throughout the sample exam, so that will definitely be the case on your exam day. Stimulus one, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. This is a perfect prompt to do a modern impact on country sort of type. And you could discuss here that, climate change, land management and destruction, urbanization, and how that's going to affect further generations. We borrow it from our children and then we give it to our children. And then the more we ruin it, the more that's going to affect future generations to come. Okay. So that's what this stimulus would have to be interpreted as so that you fit the prompt. Stimulus two, a globe in a hand. So this is so broad. You could write this about moving or immigration or again, global warming, pollution, those related issues. It could be about the natural landscape, and it could even be about the earth as a planet, as, a broad country, not a single country, but the earth as being country for all like people, I guess, in a way. That could be a cool like little idea for a more informative piece or a blog post or something, like exploring what brings people together, and aspects of global culture could be incorporated as part of that as well. Stimulus free, my country is too far to reach, but it will forever be a part of me. This would be beautiful for a memoir. This would be great for displacement, war, a refugee and asylum seeker topic, migration, of course, having moved somewhere, or even incorporated as someone having a dual cultural identity. They don't have to have moved to the next country 50 years later. They could have just moved, but they're already reflecting on their feelings of nostalgia and they miss their place of belonging. Okay, so what can we see from the prompt? The prompts are pretty broad. So we'll talk about this later, but your exam strategy should not include coming completely unprepared for creating text. Writing about protests. So title, listen, mighty oaks from small acorns grow. Okay, what does stimulus one imply? The ability of a small protest or even a singular person to incite change and lead to a bigger spread of that idea. Raised awareness and big protests. Stimulus two, we see mouth and the tape is coming off. So this is highlighting the importance of speaking up. I would say that stimulus 2 is about individual protest because it is one person and one person is opening their mouth. And it's showing the importance of speaking up what you believe in. You could even say for, depending on which way you take it, for the bettering of your own life or to express something incredibly important, because individual protest can be about anything. It can be about small, we can't say an issue is smaller, but it can be kind of more about like personal things as well, not just big things about the world, but it seems to be individual. Stimulus free. It is not about if we want or if we can, because if we won't and if we don't, time may come when we can't. Try to change things while you still can. You might not be able to incite change. Negative ideas might become deep rooted. I feel like that would be a great one to explore different historical protests, um, or the negative outcomes of protests. You know, it's not about if we want or if we can. You can interpret that as like not really wanting to protest or fear of the negative outcomes of that, but like needing to do it, needing to stand up for your beliefs. So maybe, even a protest gone wrong, we need to try to better things, even if we have really negative implications as a result of that. Stimulus 2 of personal journeys, we already looked at. Title is This Is Me, so it should be personal. Stimulus 1, life isn't about finding yourself, life is about creating yourself. So that could be about someone's just personal life journey and the things that have shaped them to this day in whatever text type you would like to be in. Or it can be about the creation of something meaningful, um, like a project, a business, writing a book, I don't know, like becoming a musician or something that creates you, or even self-development or something like philosophy, or people that you got all of those ideas from that help you to shape you to who you are today, that are in your life. Stimulus free, my story is ready. There's enough to share as I've made plenty. Come sit at my table, listen and learn, and you will see me. Definitely has to be a flashback or some kind of memoir into significant life experiences or experience. I would, if you want to stick really closely to the prompt, from an elderly person, or it can be the life story of someone you admire or look up to, or a family member. Um, just the way you want to write it in whatever text type, or someone telling a story to someone about something, crucial life event again that happened to them. Writing about play, time well spent. Stimulus 1, play the game as well as you can, and that's what you're judged on. This is a prompt about competitive play. Play the game as well as you can, and that's what you're judged on. That would be great for sports, but it doesn't have to be. Anything can be a competitive. Board games, competitive video games, childhood competitive play in academics and sports, anything. It could even be workplace and ambition. Okay. Stimulus 2 is clearly childhood imaginative play. The only way you could bypass that if you don't like writing about childhood imaginative play is to write about nostalgia and someone observing childhood imaginative play or thinking back to when they were a kid and had these experiences. Stimulus free. Child, I've forgotten the art of being absorbed in sticks and mud pies. I seek out costly playthings, gather lumps of gold and silver. With whatever you find, create your glad games. I spend both my time and my strength over things I never can obtain. In my frail canoe, I struggle to cross the sea of desire and forget that I too am playing a game. So, exploring this idea of life being a game, maybe not treating life so seriously, not forgetting about the important things like relaxing and downtime. I spend both my time and my strength over things I never can obtain. So, this is showing that some things don't come true, and maybe put your happiness first as well and put your happiness in play. Okay, now this is my advice for this section in general. So decide on your preferred text type by practicing writing different pieces and ensuring you adopt genre features into your piece. Your meaningful message, your audience, context, and purpose being clear in your piece, and making sure your piece matches the stimulus you've chosen is also key. So practicing lots of plans. Um, this is kind of a summary of everything I've said. But another important note, scoring highly in this section, you should be coming into the exam with a planned piece, or even, a rough draft of a plan at least, or even a memorized piece that you've perfected and wish to use for this section. Why? Because the prompts outlined by Vika are really broad enough. It's not like section A or something, that students seeking high marks in English will not be coming into the exam expecting to write the perfect piece from scratch, and will come in with a completely prepared response, or at least a rough draft. Pretty much most students will at least come in with a draft. So this doesn't mean we're writing a pre-memorized response completely. You can bring all of the bones of that piece to get you the highest marks possible, and just adjust it to match the stimulus, to make sure it still definitely matches the stimulus. Um, because even if you're an amazing writer, it's not going to be realistic to write a perfect creative piece in 60 minutes. So this is my top tip and most important tip, is like write the best piece you possibly can, or one that you've done, make it amazing, perfect it. Make sure it's a topic that comes up frequently with your framework or seems to have come up on the sample exam. And then come in with that to the exam and adjust it and modify it to fit the stimulus if need be, which likely will need at least some adjustment, but probably not heaps. Okay, lastly, section C. So we need to understand arguments presented and points of view expressed. You're also marked for the analysis of ways in which language and visual features are used to present an argument and to persuade. So a key thing here is you must do your visual analysis of any visual that's included, not to be missed, and control and effectiveness of language use. Kind of getting repetitive here, not getting much new things in terms of criteria. So let's just move on. So, first thing that I've included is for your contention in your introduction, quite a lot of information is required, not only just in your intro, but for your contention statement as well. So it could be helpful to develop a formula, and I've included that on here for you. A good contention should identify all of these 5 elements. It should mention the issue and the tone word, whether the author sees the issue as good or bad, whether they're for or against the issue, the main reason for that view, and the solution that they propose or what they want to be done instead. I like to split 5 into a separate sentence, what they want instead, so then you've got that detailed contention that I keep rambling on about. Yeah. Additionally, your contention should at some point mention the audience, because audience is a requirement as well. And when you analyze intended effect in argument analysis essays, that intended effect needs to be specific to whoever the audience is too. So you must have introduced the audience in your intro, and a good place to put it is just somewhere within your contention statement. So you see a format there underneath, but I really don't like fill-in templates and formats. I just like to say that you should know the elements in the order that they should really come in, like we've got there. So looking at an example, okay, of finding a contention. Let us find a more inclusive date. This is a letter to the editor. What does Australia Day mean to me? Coons tearing around their bright blue utes with the Australian flag draped across their shoulders, loudly voicing their patriotism. Ask any of them about Australia's original inhabitants and be met with a blank stare. Isn't it time we considered a more inclusive date? From Helen Troy in Altona. Okay, so what do we see? The topic is around Australia Day and whether it's culturally appropriate and we should get rid of it. We can see the author is clearly for the issue, okay? Getting rid of Australia Day. Good. So this is the contention flowchart that we're kind of going to use and have the elements in order. So, and this is what we end up with. The author contends that changing the date of Australia Day is appropriate. So we're saying she agrees. She thinks the issue is good, use vocab to describe it, because it fails to recognize the historical implications for Indigenous Australians. So the main reason as to why we have that opinion has been provided. Splitting into a second sentence at this point, instead, she argues the date must be changed to include all Australians. Their goal, the author's goal, has been included as well. What I did notice is missing is the tone word, okay, but the reason it's not there is because this is like 4 lines. So that's why it's not there. Yeah, but good contention mentions the audience as well. Notice it's stating that this is it should be including all Australians. So the audience is Australians, and that's yeah, pretty obvious for that 4 line piece that it was just a general audience that time. Okay, now we've just revised the process of analysis. We've just talked about this, so let's look through each stage separately at this point. So the what stage is what is the author doing? We need to quote the actual PLT, the technique, explain it, and name it. So we see some examples here. The author makes use of overtly negative language that's the same as saying negative connotations, such as terrible human being to establish Chris Brown in an unfavorable light. Beautiful, quoted, and explained. This is being done to establish Chris Brown in an unfavorable light. By describing his actions as brawling with a crew, the author employs language reminiscent of gang violence and brutal street fights. Beautiful explanation of negative connotations. We always want to show what they are associated with. We're saying brawling and crew are reminiscent of gang violence and brutal street fights. Okay, intended effect answer is the question, how's the audience positioned? It is intended, not actual, so we need to make sure we're not fence sitting and not including any statements or suggestions as to whether the author is achieving the intended effect effectively or not, because we can't judge that and we don't know that. Vocabulary should reflect that. We need to avoid any high modality language that indicates a high degree of certainty. For example, saying something like, the author persuades audiences. Well, did the author persuade? We don't know that. So we say aims to persuade, okay? So that's really important. Something else that can get you in trouble. And your intended effect should, as frequently as possible, be very specific to the audience that the author is targeting and not just saying the audience or in a broad way, okay? So, thus, the author invites readers to consider how their support of Brown might endorse his harmful behavior. Remember, I said intended effect is either think or feel or do. What audiences are being influenced to think or feel to do or do. So first one is great because it shows an example of think. She's inviting them to think how they might encourage his behavior. Second one, through which the author seeks to engender a sense of fear amongst her readership. Notice that beautiful vocabulary, engender, and later on seeks to marginalize readers. So this second one is about what the author makes the audience feel, engender a sense of fear of the misogynistic behavior that Brown could inflict in Australia. I've already explained this, but this shows an example of how to not write. How to not judge the strength of the author's effects or arguments. We can't be fence sitting. So vocabulary like this technique makes the reader feel sad. That is bad, but we could have something like this persuasive language technique is intended to elicit feelings of sadness or positions readers to feel sad. And that's acceptable because it doesn't show, or judge that it did occur or it was successful, but more like what the author is aiming to do. Now, the why analysis aims to just answer why does this support the author's argument? And it should be brought back to the contention. And essentially, in this analysis, you're showing all the other layers of argument that the author is interweaving throughout their piece and the ideas that they're adding on and adding on to build their contention. So, for example, as such, the author creates a comprehensively negative image of Brown, furthering the idea that he should not be allowed into Australia. So highlighted in green there, by creating negative image of him, it furthers the idea that why should he be allowed to perform in Australia. Um, Another one, thus the author seeks to inspire unity amongst her readers to ensure they all criticize how celebrities get a free pass when it comes to misdemeanors. They shouldn't have that entitlement and be special, neither should Chris Brown. So we see different things that the author brings into the argument to help further develop it, essentially, is the why. Now we see an example of actually completing the what, how, why process step by step. So the author appeals to nostalgia in order to inspire audiences to support her contention. So we see that appeals. The first thing that makes us think is like, okay, how does one appeal to nostalgia and why that hasn't been addressed? And how does nostalgia support her contention? All of that needs to be explained, so this is poorly done. So see, a plan has been done of the what, how, why, and you can do these what dot point plans if you struggle with argument analysis. So dot point what the technique is, appeal to nostalgia or nostalgic tone, the intended effect, it prompts us to reminisce the past, happy memories. That's very closely linked to the language as well, isn't it? Because the appeal is to nostalgia. And the why, urging us to preserve such memories. And this is just a dot point, so we're going to get a bit more detailed. So the offer begins with a nostalgic tone, which is designed to prompt her audience to reminisce the past and picture the happy memories of their childhood at the local park. Nice and specific to the context of the text. I know the quote isn't there, but that's because this is made up. In doing so, she urges the community to see that in an attempt to preserve such memories, they should not demolish the local park. So a full what, how, why analysis has been done here. And I urge you to expand at least 2 times per body paragraph. Go and do the entire what, how, why process of analysis for a technique. Don't just do either the intended effect or either the why, because it is important that just like in text response, you have furthered your analysis at various points throughout your body paragraphs and analyze in more depth, okay? Now, ultimately, your task is to analyze how language, both visual and written, is used to shape meaning and argument and to position audiences in a particular way for a particular reason. I will say, if the bulk of marks in section A is for your analysis, especially your views and values, the bulk of marks in argument analysis will lie in being able to do meaningful intended effect analysis, because it's perceived as, in a sense, I feel like it's viewed as even more important to these essays often by assessors than the why analysis, because the why analysis is very straightforward. Intended effect is your opportunity to get a bit more creative, come up with things that are not just so obvious, and your selectivity of persuasive language techniques, not just choosing the basic and easy stuff like rhetorical questions and listing. Yes, you will still use them, but look for things like juxtapositions, subtle appeals, parallelism, analogies, sarcasm, irony, humor, and go and look for those subtle techniques. We see an example here of what not to do. The author uses a variety of persuasive devices to show that plastic supermarket toys are bad. She says that the objects are no doubt a 7-day wonder, which makes readers agree with her contention. So, avoid simple language. Show, bad, and says are simple words to choose. Don't use show, make, or says as well. Add make to the list. Substitute those bad, non-specific words for specific words. Have those writer does or authorial purpose lists that I talked about. Build your vocab. It's way too broad overall as well, especially that first sentence. Did we achieve the what step? No quote, no specific technique identified, and no explanation. Nothing is really there. Just shows that plastic toys are bad. The quote isn't being analyzed, that has been introduced later on. And never say anything like, which makes readers agree with the author's contention, or which makes readers agree with the author's argument or support the author's argument. Never, ever, ever make judgments like that, okay? And don't, that's basically a statement with no proof, okay? We can never say that. A why analysis needs to show exactly what additional element the author is trying to convince of or to add to the argument. Of course, it's trying to get them to agree with them, but what is it? Never say that. So we see a fix up. The author ardently condemns plastic supermarket toys for her description of the promotional toys as mere objects. Short and succinct quote. Um, and look, technique is not really possible to identify here. Sometimes you'll have that, sometimes it is just a little quote that you're analyzing. But in this case, we've got connotations being analyzed, though they're neither negative or positive in a clear manner. So we're just referring to them as connotations. So the language of objects carries connotations of worthlessness, stripping them of personality, which attempts to make the reader disregard their value. In doing this, the author seeks to charge her parental audience to avoid collecting the toys. So yeah, like we see with connotations, you always need to identify what that language is linked to. Worthlessness, stripping them of personality. And a why analysis has been done as well, clearly saying that, oh, there's harm in actually collecting these toys. Bit of a list of subtle persuasive language techniques for you guys. And you know that this is all a formulaic task. You just want to know a lot of techniques, know their general functions, be great at intended effect, and analyzing evidence in the context of a specific article, and making links to audience all the time, you know, those kinds of things. So this is in no way an exhaustive list. This is just some things on this slide. A lot of things can be considered subtle PLTs. We know what the basic ones are. Yes, we still need to analyze. Yes, they're amazing sometimes, but we want to strike a balance if we can. So visual analysis. This should be going within your body paragraphs. We never want to see visual analysis being done in a separate paragraph for some reason. It should go within your body paragraphs. And, you know, it's a bit of a step-by-step format you can use for how to do it as well. So, first of all, find a gateway directly quoting from the text. Essentially find after which piece of evidence the visual analysis would be appropriate to do, where there is a link between the written and visual material. I will say this, usually visuals have been placed in the text in that spot for a reason. So all you need to do is the last thing you were analyzing just before the visual, right after that, your visual analysis is going to go. Okay? Because they embed images in a certain place in the text for a reason. They're literally usually related to directly to the paragraph above it. So that's where you link to your visual material. It's just as simple as that. And it goes within the same body paragraph, no separate paragraph. It's part of the argument. So step number one, you need to describe what the visual is literally depicting. Think foreground, background, and central object. What are the most important elements of the visual? That you can give a quick description. In this sentence, also identify the visual type. Is it a photograph? Is it a cartoon? A caricature? Identify the visual type in this step as well. You will go to find 1 to 2 things, probably max, to analyze about the visual that you think are significant. So this is consider the symbolic meaning of the visual. We still need meta language. State what it is you're analyzing and describe it, because remember, it's not a quote, it's visual material. So if you're saying you want to analyze a facial expression, say it's a facial expression, describe what it looks like, and then start analyzing using the same what, how, why process of analysis. So keep it to 1 to 2 things that you want to analyze. Then you need to make a final link to suggest that this visual further reinforces the author's argument. How does it further support their argument? Okay. So a little bit of a list of things that we could analyze in a visual. We've got symbolism, size or scale, things being juxtaposed in a visual, facial expressions, speech even, labels, caricature, background, foreground. If there is a central object, that can be analyzed too. And anything that links between the visual and written text. So maybe there's something super related in the visual to something in the text, and you could just do a combined analysis of that together. Now, this is you could see with this visual what's relevant. The poster, oh, the poster in the background of the text indicates that phones are banned within the classroom. The student's remark saying, "Is analog okay, miss?" indicates upset and sarcasm. Can he just use analog then? The students' expressions indicate they're highly annoyed and addicted to their mobile devices and annoyed that they can't use their phones in class. The teacher's expression indicates that she is very sad about what is on the whiteboard, the fact that there is a cyberbullying issue within the school, and she's written no cyberbullying because of that. So we can see that this would be, if this was part of an article, it would be an article about how phones for kids are an extremely damaging and unnecessary thing to have in school and how it leads to bullying and things like that. Great. Okay, on to the last part. Some final exam tips. We had exam tips pretty much for every single section besides section C at the end of doing each little section. So this will be just some extra stuff and some general exam prep things. So structuring our exam, I already said this actually, but start on section C. You have 15 minutes of reading time. Honestly, during my year 12 exam, also because I had attempted it a few times before going in on the day, 15 minutes was plenty to read through the whole exam, pick my section A prompt, pick my section B, and then for section C, to have the full plan in my head, as soon as I can pick up the pen, I'm highlighting the pieces of evidence where each argument is, which techniques I'm going to use from that article. I'm writing out a contention, dot point topic sentences, and any introduction elements that I needed to write out, like who the audience was. And then ASAP started writing. Most effective, best way to save time, you must start on section C. Now, whether you start section A or B next is definitely up to you, but I would prefer to go to A next and leave the creative piece for last. Also because it might end up very time consuming for you if you don't come in with what we talked about, having that strategy, a pre-memorized piece or at least a really comprehensive plan that you're gonna adjust to match the stimulus. If you don't have that, your section B might take you a long time. And also, C and A, those sections are both structured essays. So you shouldn't do a creative in the middle of that. It doesn't really make sense to me to do that. And I think it's kind of all over the place. So I would go C, A, B. I said don't use show says makes. If you're using this vocab at this stage, this is a really big no-no at this stage of the year. So, bit of a non-comprehensive list of, this is what I'm saying. Make a list of writer does words, authorial purpose verbs. These are just a few. This is, again, no way an exhaustive list. This is one way. Students always ask me, how can I improve my vocabulary? This is actually a big part of it. What you use for your authorial intent, what verbs you use. But yeah, make sure they're very specific. Show says makes are broad, have no connotations associated with them. All of these are, have different shades of meaning. That's what you should strive for, really. So, okay, a little bit on section C as well. What are the common mistakes? So I think I've talked about some of this already, inevitably as well. But analysis focusing just on listing techniques. So a lot of students don't really realize that they're doing this, but often include a technique, kind of like explain it, but it's not analyzed and it's just moving on. So that's a big no-no. Just stick to that what, how, why process. Just revise it. You've got some examples now as well from these slides. MT analysis, that's just essentially the general functions of techniques rather than evidence being analyzed in light of the specific issue, the context, the actual article, and the audience. So it's great to know general functions of techniques, but you wouldn't think so. But in section C, you need to be creative. You need to think outside of the box. Some of the analytical ideas that you come up with should be, I wouldn't say far-fetched, but they should be definitely from reading between the lines. That will get you those good marks. Repetition is a big no-no as well. Like if you're not able to come up with different ideas as you go through the body paragraph and you're like repeating things. What helps to mitigate that? It means you need to do much more planning. I would go through and spend like a couple of hours even with one article. First of all, annotating the whole thing and doing that like initial plan that you do, your introduction elements, your contention, topic sentences, and then for the evidence you've selected, do instead of writing an essay, force yourself to write out each persuasive language technique and complete the full what, how, why process for it. Sitting there and adjusting if repetitiveness is happening and seeing all the ideas you can come up with. Like, try to write as much as you possibly can for intended effect for that technique and for the why, and go through like that and see your, you know, writing expanding a little bit and hopefully getting more, relevant and specific to the issue and the article. And paraphrasing what the author is saying rather than actually analyzing is another big problem as well. Sometimes students may not realize, but that technique analysis is kind of like just a summary of what the author made blatantly obvious that they said that they were trying to do. So the same thing that I just told you guys is what will help. And I can guarantee, like, all of the students that I've done that with, we've done those detailed article breakdown, highlight, annotate, and then plan, and then what, how, why for every technique. They have helped every student get good at section C because it is formulaic as well. So have a go. Great technique to improve your marks. For maximizing marks in section A, some additional tips that are not listed previously when we went through tips. Go beyond the scope of the text and place an emphasis on discussing views and values and discussing it a lot. Again, bulk of marks for this. Go to those articles, Google Scholar, and find critics' articles for your text and figure out how you can stand out by getting those ideas from critics as well, or working with your teacher as well. That can be a great valuable source of ideas too. Using intent verbs and meta language. So like I said, expand those lists, especially if your writer does words. Make vocab lists for context specific terms for your text as well, and any thematic specific vocabulary for your text as well. For example, if your text often has prompts that relate to a gender roles or feminist interpretation, you pick up terms like androcentric society, patriarchy, everyone probably knows that one, and you collect those terms to scatter them throughout your analysis, and you already have those fancy sounding sentences. If you just had theme related, vocab list, context related, potentially, especially intent verbs with a bit of signposting as well, like that will already go a long way for a student that thinks they want to up their vocabulary and that it will make a difference. That will make a big difference. Doing lots of prompt breakdowns, drawing on the implications of a question, making sure we have a counter argument for each prompt, and analyzing structural features. Absolute avoidance of plot retell. Plot is not evidence, and if you use plot as evidence, you will struggle. And it is not a feedback point on the examiner's report that a lot of students come in without enough evidence memorized and do plot retell. So don't be that student, because it's actually not common on the exam. Textual evidence, limit the background contextual information that you put around that textual evidence, because it's not really needed and it should be minimal. Sometimes it is like really relevant, but it should be succinct. Being very specific. Okay. As we went through, I gave tips for all of the different sections, but this is our general what you should be doing. So, to avoid burnout with English, know when to break up your studies with other subjects first of all. English is a pretty exhausting subject, As someone who did free English subjects, I did lit and English language as well. Something I didn't like, I didn't find that I liked English as much. The fact is, I enjoyed writing a lot, but it is really formulaic like maths a little bit, you know? So in literature where I got used to writing in whatever structure and style I wanted and making each essay go into like the depths of like what language means, like what all of these literary devices mean. That wasn't something I could do in English. And I did separate them and I successfully didn't mix the two up and mess up either of my results. But I did find it exhausting to going from like having fun writing to finding a little bit boring and formulaic. So what I would say is plan when you're going to do English and break it up so you can do other subjects around it. It should never be like a subject that you do study every day because I feel like you are going to get burnt out if you do that. But that's true for almost every subject. Plan your study to be effective as well. Do not like waste time doing useless things. You come in every day with a specific task. Today, I still don't have a quotes bank with analysis for my text, so I'm going to do that today. You know, today I'm going to do 10 practice plans, giving myself 1.5 hours. Today I'm going to write a practice essay for section C under time conditions. Okay, so be efficient with how you study, and that way you'll find that you don't have to study nearly for as long as well. Do other activities if you're not in an English mood. There are other things that you can do that are very useful, reading examiners' reports and annotating them, making notes on them, marking your own work, rewriting an essay that you did to improve it based on feedback. Quote banks are not very exhausting either. It's quite not stressful to do. Rereading your old essays, going through past exams. The paragraph plans are also a good one because they're short. And find ways of studying that aren't tedious to you. It's different for everyone. Someone might say, like, some students might say that having that quotes bank is a bad idea. They prefer doing flashcards for all of their quotes and have the analysis on the other end. And that's great. That's absolutely perfect. And yeah, hold yourself accountable for what needs to be done and plan ahead so that you feel prepared for the exam. For a lot of you, English will be the first exam, and if you kind of feel like you flunk it, it's gonna probably make you feel horrible for the rest of them and affect your performance on the rest. So, you know, definitely try to at least feel like you did the best that you could, and you try to work hard. It is the last year after all. Now imagine the exam is a week away and you didn't study and you've fallen behind. What are the things that you should do that did happen to you? See if you can still get some feedback from your teacher. Do some last minute writing. If you haven't done a full practice exam, giving yourself that 3 hour time limit, you need to do it. You need to find out about your pace. If you don't make time conditions, it's like imagine if you missed the whole section of the exam, you already have a third of all exam marks missing. Plus, imagine you did average on the other sections, so you had 20 out of 40 for the other two sections. So you have 20 out of 60. So now your study score is gonna be what? It's gonna be below that 30 mark, well below almost. So um you don't need to do it's enough to do one full practice exam technically. I would say, on top of your trial exams that you do at school, like another one, and then you've done two. But when you do the second one, you've studied, and if you're happy with those results, you can stop there. If you're okay with how you did in timing and everything. Because one thing is, it really hurts your hands to do the 3 hour exam writing the whole time and trying to produce a lot of work. So try not to ruin your hands before like the exam and get some good pens. Get some good pens. You will need it. Otherwise, it's fine to just do like hour-long sections, giving yourself an hour to do each section, and you can just do that as an alternative as well. making sure you make it in time. And do some additional things to hone your ideas. Like if you didn't find some nuances you could analyze in section A and some impressive views and values, then go and do that then while you've still got like some time for last minute study. If you feel like you've done everything you could have done and now you're kind of just ready, find those little additional things you can do. And see if you can mark yourself against examiners' prompts if your teachers have a cutoff point for giving you feedback for writing and you're not able to get it anymore. Importantly, take care of yourself. So, importantly, not procrastinating so that you don't feel bad and regretful later because that feeling will stick and it's not what you want to deal with. Um, don't study when you are actually tired and stressed, like not as just an excuse, but when you actually really are. It's not going to be effective study. It's actually going to make you feel worse and approach more towards burnout. Application is key. You won't get far just reading and trying to memorize your quotes and stuff. And those are the key sort of things, I would say. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. I hope you enjoy the lecture, and I really want to wish you all the best. Best of luck on the English exam, not far now, and hopefully this helped you guys. Thank you, everyone.